Okay, this is the second episode. This one is going to be on cold calling in position. So, why do we typically cold call in position? It's normally when we have a strong hand which is going to expect to net us a profit. It's going to be a good investment. Our hand is going to be typically quite strong or can make a strong hand, and it's going to perform very well against the opener's range. So hands which are going to perform well in these kind of positions are going to be, well, put it this way, they're going to be stronger holdings than the opening ranges. So if we do let's just forget that. I'll put in, so the opening range that we had in early position from the previous video, it might be something like this, 17.5%. So this is typically for MP, but just ignore this for a second. So what sort of hands are going to do well against this kind of range? Well, if we make a top pair type hand, we're going to want to have the better kicker. So we're not going to be wanting to flat as wide as this. So we can basically instantly eliminate kind of the bottom half of hands for each kind of hand type. So like this will just be chop, but it's going to be dominated by these hands. So you're kind of looking at, even like king queen just gets eliminated straight away. Queen jack off, obviously gone. Then it might look something like this, and jack 10 suited you might keep in to it can make some big straights, flushes and stuff, so you might want to keep that in, you might not. It's, you know, it's up for debate. Then these kind of hands will typically be 3-bet, and then these pairs are fairly typical flats, jacks through to 8s, then kind of 7s, 6s and 5s against middle position would not typically be flatted, but some people might choose to. So this is a kind of as typical as it gets flatting range, and then the hands that we eliminated might be used in a 3-bet value range or 3-bet bluff range. Small pairs aren't typically 3-bet bluff, but yeah. So these are the kind of hands which you'll see in a good kind of cold calling in position range against another good player. They're going to perform well. They're going to make the best kind of flushes possible. They're going to make the best top pairs possible. The best straights. You're going to flop open-enders. You're not going to be flopping many gut shots, only with these ones. These ones don't really exist. And also if you are going to make a set, it's typically going to, I mean, these hands are in the middle. I think we started at 5 and ended at the aces. But if the guy's opening wider, he might have these. You can overset him. Also, these middle pairs, or like the kind of top middle pairs, they have inherent strength. So whereas deuces are going to have either a set or just 3 overcards, these can have just 1 overcard, in which case you're happy to call a c-bet or 2, and you know your opponent is probably going to give up, or at least they're not going to barrel at 100% frequency. Whereas these kind of hands are going to have very bad playability if you don't flop a set, and you're going to have to give up very quickly. So yeah, these are why you don't really call the low pairs right now in the metagame. You know, back in the day, I think set mining used to be a big thing. Just try and call every pair and try and stack some guys, you know, overpair, which he's just never going to fold. So one situation when you cold call is when you flat and then someone behind re-raises. So also if, you know, this guy opens and we flat here, we can be out of position to a squeeze as well. So how does like a typical range deal with a squeeze? So if the original raiser has folded, our range is quite face up if we're playing quite solid, which can make it tricky to play against. So if we call and the guy's playing well and the flop comes kind of 2 of these cards, jack 10-9, any of them, he might play his like overpair a bit more safe, and also if he's 3-betting quite aggressively, although he may bluff off with some unpaired stuff like these hands, he might just shut down and think we're never folding an overpair, or he can just go crazy with his bigger pairs and we just lose. So it can make them quite hard to play. So for this reason, also the unpaired hands are typically dominated by ace king, and even these unpaired, so obviously when you pair an ace with this hand that you cold call once, then cold call again, you're going to have kicker problems on the ace, leading to reverse implied odds, which is when, you probably already know it, but you're trying to draw to a kind of a good hand, but all that happened is you ended up paying off a guy who's got the better hand. This is also a thing in just a single raise pot. You know, if you call with like deuces and you see the flop 4 ways, because people are going to know that someone's going to have made a strong hand at a higher frequency than if it was heads up. If there's 4 of you on the flop, you kind of reverse implied odds on like bottom set, for example. So it's another reason why to stay away from these low sets in like big multi-way pots. Against good players, that is. Having said that, if the players are really bad and the guy's never going to fold aces on like jack 8, deuce, rainbow, then, you know, calling deuces can still be fine. Oh yeah, this is just a graph of my cold calling in position. I think it works out to be roughly kind of like a 11% return on investment whenever you cold call in position. So when you do it correctly, it can be pretty profitable. You've got to remember also that so when the player opens, although the big blind is getting roughly like 3 to 1 on a call, the player in position is only getting like 37% on a call. So it's actually a rare spot where the guy can open quite small or just a standard 3x, and the in position players who have not invested any money so far, the bet size is perceived as an overbet. So you actually do need a strong holding to experience like a good return. Like even 3s is a pretty light call here. The only reason this hand is selected is because it's my biggest pot 1 where I cold called in position, so you can maybe not even pay attention to this. And I think all of these players are regs, but I don't really follow this logic normally, but because we were deep, I called wider. I'm not sure whether that's a good adjustment to make. Some people follow that logic. I wouldn't normally, but I think I was just tried to like hijack someone else's logic. I'm not sure how much you should buy into it, because as stack size increases, you know, my reverse implied odds on making a set of a set situation can lose me like a lot of money. So yeah, how should we react to squeezes? I'll just finish this point. So you can call and try and make a big hand, you know, with a set. Call and try and bluff catch versus ace king type hands. Call and try and get the guy to bluff off with these hands. And if the guy is very narrow, then you can just fold pre. And these hands are going to perform actually really, really badly. Kind of ace queen is the sort of hand you might be able to make an argument for calling with. If the guy starts squeezing merged with ace queen type hands, which is fairly typical from out of position, then, you know, these two hands and this hand here, king queen, ace jack, ace 10, they're going to perform really badly against ace queen and ace king. So you kind of just want to avoid it when you've cold called once. Like, I think it's pretty normal to just cold call and then kind of fold. Obviously you can adjust your strategy. So this is what I've spoken about so far, is like if you have a pure strategy of always doing the same thing with all of your hands, so then you can start introducing, you know, some slow plays, maybe low frequency slow plays, 25% of each combination. Then your cold call range in position might look something like this, and then you can tamper with the frequencies given the positions and stuff. So you can do some interesting things like that if you want to protect your range. As it is, you don't actually have to defend against squeezes all that much, because firstly, your range is pretty solid, so the guys in the blinds or in position, they can't go crazy and just 3-bet really wide, because you do have some decent value hands. If you notice them squeezing like 6s, you can just cold call, and then they'll start losing money that way. But yeah, typical squeeze percents are like 5%, so like the top 5% of hands, you know, is typically just massive broadways, pairs, and like maybe some very playable suited aces. So yeah, set mining, is it still a thing? I was coaching a student the other day. In my opinion, it's not really a thing. You have, against good players, you have reverse implied odds, as I said, a lack of playability. However, if the players behind you aren't going to be 3-betting very much, and if the players in front of you are like V-pipping and they're very bad, and they have narrow ranges and they're always going to stack off with a top pair, top kicker type hand, then you can make an argument for coming along with a small pocket pair. And when I say small, that means kind of sixes through to deuces. So those are the kind of situations where I think set mining has more merit. Low squeeze, low probability of getting squeezed, high probability of stacking someone who's going to overvalue a weak hand. What sort of hands do people cold call in the past? So I don't know, I've always been a bit more of a modern player, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, I never played in the golden age and stuff. But I would imagine kind of any sort of suited broadways, maybe some offsuit stuff, trying to make some big pairs, and maybe some other suited hands. But I think, yeah, maybe it's just typical bad player syndrome, just like trying to maybe draw a big hands. I haven't really talked about suited connectors. I think they kind of play the same way as a set, but sometimes you can also get straight over straighted. It's like I would tend to stick to the top end broadways. For example, I think 8-9 is notorious for performing very badly, because when ace king makes the nut straight, your bottom end of the straight, 10 jack queen, you're always crushed, and people are always playing ace king, obviously. So you know, this kind of hand has some pretty bad reverse implied odds in some spots. Whereas like I think these ones are typically better performers from what I hear, from my database, and also what Poker Snowy recommends. So yeah, just a brief note on Snowy. What does Snowy like to call? So for those of you who don't know what Poker Snowy is, it's like advertised as a kind of GTO program. It learned how to play against itself by playing it versus itself like trillions of hands over. I think it plays really well. And the hands it kind of advocates for, the ranges would be quite similar to this. So in very early position, it might narrow everything up. It might fold this hand, for example, against the 3x. It might call hands like, so it will definitely 3-bet them, It might call as narrow as this against the 3x sizing. Against 2x, it might call a bit wider. Also in early position, it likes to kind of 3-bet more playable hands like these ones, and then just fold to a 4-bet and maybe these type hands, because it's trying to fold out hands behind. But this is about 3-betting really. But yeah, so whereas when you're in, if this guy opens and you're in the button, then it will kind of 3-bet wider for value, like 3-bet all of these things, and then it will also flat lower. So these are some things to consider, because there's less people behind to squeeze. So in this spot, if this guy opens and we're here, there's only 2 people to squeeze, whereas when you're here and this guy's here, and you flat this position, there's 4 people to squeeze. So you want your range to be stronger. And there's a lot of emphasis on pocket pairs. I think cold calling in position is kind of like a set mining. Oh, not set mining, it's not the same as set mining, but it's like a set kind of war, or like a pair war. Who can make the best pair, who can make the best set. So what sort of frequencies do people cold call? So for me, and I think I cold call somewhat correctly, against this player, just averaged across these 3 positions, I'll have a flat percent of about 4%. So 4% of all hands, like hypothetically. What else would I flat? Yeah, this is probably like, wow, is that exactly the same range I had before? I think it is. Yeah, this would be, you know, a fairly typical flat for me against this opening position. There'll be some deviation, because sometimes I'll 3-bet a hand like ace queen, and king queen suited. Sometimes I'll flat these ones, if I think the spot is good or correct too. And maybe, yeah, you know, if the player seems bad and I want to set mine against him, then I'll widen. And then, so yeah, against this guy 4%, against this guy 5%, and against the cutoff I'll flat 6%. So it's kind of very simple linear adjustments. And obviously against this position, I'll be 3-betting wider for value. or just hands which are playable. So yeah, this is a kind of 6% sort of range, 7%. Yeah, I'll probably 3-bet that at some percent. Yeah, it would look kind of like this. Obviously, you know, free to try whatever you want, but this is kind of just an example set of ranges which, you know, I've used in the past. I've tried many strategies, so, but I think that's probably my average strategy over the last 18 months. So yeah, which range does better, the opener or the cold caller? This depends on, obviously, the raise first in frequency and the cold caller frequency, but just the standard, the cold caller in position is going to perform better. So we just do a quick range comparison maybe. Let's do this. Is that what we had before? I think it is. Let's put that in there. And then 17.5% open range. Okay, this is fine. Apply. So yeah, the cold caller does perform better, which I think you should logically interpret because, as I said before, the player facing the open is faced with an overbet, so they need a very high equity hand to justify a call. So the in-position player should be coming out with the best of it most of the time. However, one other thing to consider is that this range is incredibly capped. Not incredibly, like there's some very, very strong holdings. It's out, you know, on average it's outperforming this, but basically on a board including lots of ace, king and queen textures, this player is going to be stomping this player. And when the board comes mid-range, then the in-position player is going to be performing significantly better. A quick shout out to the ace queen X boards, the in-position player. Ace queen is one of the most flattered hands pre, so you know, look out for 2 pairs on that kind of board texture. Yep. So just a shout out to if you RFI, you know, your standard range, which is this one, and the cold caller in position is like just like a, you know, loose passive kind of fishy type. Then there can be scenarios where the initial raiser is outperforming the cold caller. So, you know, if the guy just wants, if he just sees 2 suited broadways and hands that can make straights, and he just wants to play them, then see what we can do. Maybe he likes the look of offsuit connectors, maybe he wants to make a wheel, you know, just hypothetically. Then obviously the original raiser is suddenly having a massive edge. So yeah, this isn't a great example because there's not many players like this anymore, but just hypothetically, let's make it a bit better. See if we still have an edge. Yeah, he still has a massive edge. So yeah, you know, when some players open in late position and the big blind defense, and it's standard for the big blind to check 100% of its range, you know, there's an argument to be made for the original raiser to always check, apart from on ace king queen type boards where they're very favourable for the under the gun player, but you know, there could be an argument for check your entire range to the cold caller in position. Maybe, you know, it works for the big blind versus original raisers, why not in other positions? Whereas when your opponent cold calls very wide, then you can just kind of go crazy with your betting, and you know, you should be performing well enough to not run into the nuts at a high frequency. So that's a brief mention on kind of flop strategy, depending on what your RFI is, what the cold caller's frequency is, what sort of hands they'll be playing, and how the ranges interact. And I guess we should also mention when the guy opens very narrow, and what a good cold calling strategy might be against a narrow open. So this is particularly narrow, but so yeah, if the frequency, let's say, is 7%, there could kind of be a situation where there's a gentleman's agreement behind with the players behind, who, if they're aware that he's opening very narrow, they're not going to be so inclined to 3-bet squeeze very light, given that he's going to be weighted to very strong holdings very often, who are not going to fold to 3-bets and also are going to 4-bet him at a higher frequency. So there could be some situations where, you know, these players are coming along with like 3s, 5s, 7s, 8s, if they know the type player is not going to fold big pairs very fast. Obviously some reverse implied odds associated with that, but that's just something to think about as well. So yeah, we've talked about tight cold callers and loose cold callers. So my ranges would be, you know, the tight cold caller. They're the ones who are expecting the hands are going to kind of speak for themselves. They're going to print a profit. We're not really calling these type of hands, trying to make a goofy straight, trying to make hidden straight, just trying to play the hand as it is, take your equity and get out, and not try and get into a tough spot with deuces, trying to hero call and stuff. Just play it pretty solid. We haven't really talked about how to exploit a loose opener. So again, not many people open super wide, but I think it's more to exploit a loose opener. It's more to do with how they play post flop. So if they open loose and barrel very hard, then you can be more inclined to set mine. If they open wide and, you know, they can play passive and maybe give free cards, maybe it is there is more incentive to play suited stuff. This is the really bad range. Some suited stuff to make a flush, maybe, I don't know, if he's not going to fold kind of 2 pairs and stuff, when a flush comes in, then maybe go for it. But firstly, it's quite rare, and like you can end up in trouble if you play like flush over flush type spots if you're playing 7-6 suited. So yeah, it's not really something you need to dwell too much on loose openers, how you should adjust your strategies to that. It's more to do with 3-betters behind you and stuff. Brief mention on how the players should play heads up. Yeah, so I've just talked about the flop strategies, maybe checking to the cold caller on a lot of board textures unless there's a lot of these type of cards. Subsequent cold callers maybe get a mention. So yeah, I think most players nowadays in the Zoom pools, they kind of know how to, at least the regs, they know how to cold call correctly, the same as me. So I think we settled on this range, but I think people get significantly more inclined to come along wider when they're kind of the 3rd or the 4th player coming in. And I know Poker Snowy keeps its strategy very tight, solid. If there's been a raise and a call here, it doesn't get induced in with like 5s or 6s. In fact, it actually tightens its range compared to if this guy didn't cold call. So let's just imagine this scenario: open, call, and Snowy on the button. If there was an open and it folds to the button, Snowy might call a hand like 7s or 8s. When there's a raise, a call, and it comes to the button, Snowy actually likes to fold 7s and 8s and just call like very narrow, like jacks and 10s almost exclusively, and maybe some suited unpaired stuff. I can't really vouch for the suited broadways because I can't remember exactly what it likes to do, but I'm pretty sure it sticks to kind of pocket pairs, very strong pocket pairs. Like, it's almost like it's trying to avoid set over set. I know set over set is a very rare situation, but it's just trying to reduce its risk and try and always be ahead of the ranges which have V-pipped. You know, this guy's going to be, he's going to be wide but uncapped. This guy's going to be very solid but capped. And then you kind of want to come in with an even more solid but even more capped range. Whereas queens would always be a 3-bet pretty much in that situation. And jacks would like never be a 3-bet or low frequency 3-bet. So that's just something else to consider. I think, so yeah, the key cliff notes, as it were, would be the reality is subsequent cold callers flat wider, and I think then it's more profitable to squeeze when there's been multiple callers, but possibly in theory it's better to cold call even tighter, I think it's because you can't cold call wider, because if you know that the third caller or the fourth caller is incredibly wide, then 3-betting becomes significantly more profitable for squeezers, and they just burn money that way. So yeah, that's just something that should get mentioned. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I've tried to keep this one more brief. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something, and I'll see you in the next video, which will be on calling out of the big blind and basically big blind defense strategy. So yeah, I'll see you next time.